Hello, I'm Ryan McEachern and welcome to episode 32 of The Dig. Big show today, Deloitte's annual Tracking the Trends 2021. The top issues transforming the future of mining is out. Some of the trends include ESG, supply chains, safety, and digital transformation. We have Andrew Swart from Deloitte on the show to break all this down and to let us know what these trends mean to you. Stephanie Alvarez is back with an update on everything MSTA Canada and our plans for PDAC, including the B2B networking platform. And we'll finish things off with another round of 6 and 60, basically where my producer challenges me to read 6 of the biggest mining stories in 60 seconds. So let's get to it. PDAC is coming, and MSTA Canada has big plans to help you get in front of as many people and companies as possible. Here's Stephanie Alvarez to explain what you can expect from us during PDAC. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Ryan. PDAC 2021 is just a few weeks away, and here are a couple of the events MSTA Canada will be running. In collaboration with Global Affairs Canada, MSTA Canada will host the B2B networking platform, which will be the best way to get new business opportunities. This event will allow you to set up B2B meetings with international delegations, as well as with the Trade Commission service from over 40 different countries. Registration is at all-time high, so go ahead and register right away to make sure that you get as many meetings as possible. We will also host a series of panel discussions, which topics will include geoscience redefined, drilling differently, and the path to electric battery. I will be sending a registration email to all of our members this week for this, as well as with the B2B networking platform. If you have any questions, if I can help in any way, you can contact me directly at alvarez@mstacanada.ca. And just one more thing before I go, your feedback is very important to us. We have emailed to all of our members a survey about how you have managed this past year, what your future plans may or may not be like, including travel, trade shows, and any other events. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey so we can serve you to the best of our abilities. I hope everybody has a great week.
Thanks, Steph. Every year around this time, Deloitte publishes its annual Tracking the Trends, where they identify 10 of the most important trends the mining industry is focusing on. And this year's report is themed Closing the Trust Deficit. We're going to focus on the most relevant trends for the mining supply and services sector. I'm very pleased to have back with me again, Andrew Swart, Global and Canadian leader of the mining and metals practice for Deloitte. So let's dig in now with Andrew. Hi, Andrew. Welcome back to The Dig.
Hey there. Nice to be back, Ryan.
Excellent. And, the long-awaited Tracking of the Trends, an annual report that comes out by Deloitte has finally hit the presses, if you will, or have gone out. And Tracking of the Trends. So you come up with a new title called Closing the Trust Deficit. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little on how you came about that title.
Sure thing. Look, so every year we step back from the trends and we look if there's a sort of a common theme that runs through them. And so this year, I think as we reflected on the industry, we feel like the industry has found itself or finds itself in a very interesting position. On the one hand, it's an industry that is critical to a low carbon future, but at the same time, it's an industry which remains highly undercapitalized. It's an industry which has the ability and the potential to drive huge amounts of employment in different parts of the world where it operates, but is an industry which struggles to find, albeit a talent magnet. It's an industry which has done an immense amount of good during the COVID crisis in different communities around the world, but yet it's an industry which probably continues and will continue to be targeted for tax changes and royalty changes and all the rest. And so when you step back from all of that, a lot of this really points to a deficit of trust that exists with different stakeholders, be they investors, be they talent, community, government, or even society at large. And this for us was reinforced in a report that the World Economic Forum released in the middle of last year, where they actually spoke about trust, as reported by the industry, as being probably the single biggest risk facing the mining industry today. And so hence our sort of title around the trust deficit and closing that trust deficit. And the way that we've built this particular report across each of these key trends is to show how the mining industry can potentially close that trust deficit with different stakeholder groups.
Right. And I believe on, if for the viewers that will or have read the report, trend one, we kind of did a deeper dive last fall on. Trend two is more tied to kind of M&A and finance, and
Correct.
I'm just kind of quickly overviewing a couple of here. And the last one's tied to critical minerals, which we had talked about on our last episode.
Yep.
So I kind of want to focus a little more on the other ones outstanding here. So, with regards to trend number 3, decarbonization, what does this mean? Maybe you can explain a little bit of what we're talking about when we say decarbonization.
Sure. So maybe before we get into that, Ryan, let me just sort of, prefix this by, in our trends last year, our first trend out of the gate was around ESG. And what we've seen over the course of the year is momentum just continuing to build around ESG right across the industry, right? So you cannot speak to a CEO of a mining company today where they're not getting some pressure from investors or stakeholders around this particular topic, right? So this year, as you'll see in our trends, we actually cover it 3 times. Like, we actually decouple the E, the S, and the G. And as you point out, the E, which is the environmental portion of this, we talk specifically around decarbonization. And when it comes to decarbonization, there are kind of 2 aspects to this. One is the mining companies themselves are actually large, emitters of greenhouse gases, or they also consume a large amount of energy, right? And so what do mining companies actually do themselves to put them onto a path towards, net zero or some lower carbon, carbon target? And so the trend specifically deals with moving from those aspirations that you might put out to your investors or to the broader community to actually driving that to action. And so how do you translate that into a real roadmap with commitments down at the mine site level? The other portion of ESG, and this maybe touches more on some of the kind of the critical minerals in trend 10, which you referred to as well, is mining is also part of that broader decarbonization solution in terms of a lot of the minerals that it's actually, mining, be they copper or nickel or cobalt, etc. And so the trend really deals with both of those 2 issues.
Right. And so, and to your point, you've broken out the ESG into 3 major components here. So touching a little more on trend 4, which is on the social part, it's really speaking about making sure, being very clear about how the local stakeholders, many stakeholders, but I'm thinking that it's the communities that are really key, that social license, if you will, that seems to be key to this trend. Am I right?
It is. About 2 years ago, we coined a phrase or a term which we spoke about as value beyond compliance. And the notion behind value beyond compliance is that the expectation of communities and society is that companies were going beyond just pure compliance activities and really driving value, social value, or economic value within those particular communities. So what the S of ESG, the social side of this, really deals with is to say, if mining companies are making these particular investments in these communities or in these regional, governments, how can they tie that to real outcomes, and be there outcomes around economic development, how could be outcomes around, social infrastructure or social impact. And so the idea really is to become very tangible around the impact that you're making. And again, comes back to this broader theme of value beyond compliance.
Right. And I think that's where a lot of the supply chain can come in, is to help execute, if you will, on those local benefits, providing the jobs. We all know that the actual direct employment in an operation is a there's about 2.5 to 4 times even higher multiples of jobs feeding into the inputs of a mining. So I see it as a very key piece of how the suppliers could actually help in there.
Oh, absolutely, Ryan. I mean, I think obviously the whole concept of, localized content has been, around for a while. But I think suppliers in particular have the real ability to be able to drive economic growth in a particular region beyond just the pure mining activities, right? And so I think part of the way that mining companies need to almost be thinking about this as well is that if they are trying to create a local supplier base, that local supplier shouldn't just have all of their income, all of their revenue tied to that mine site, right? At the end of the day, the mine's going to come to a natural end of life. But perhaps while that mining company might be the seed funding for, the first couple of years for the supplier actually, ramping up, beyond that, how does that supplier actually feed other industries within that particular region, right? And maybe, export some of those particular commodities and drive to scale. And so that you actually have a set of suppliers, a set of industries driving economic development, which goes well beyond the life of the mine.
Right. And so if we jump to trend 5, which is the G in the ESG, really this is about transparency, isn't it?
It is. We also like to say that it's one of those trends which is a critical trend, but is often kind of tucked into the background and people sort of relegated to maybe a board or a compliance type function. And really what it says is that, the G of ESG is all around governance. And it's around saying, how can you put those correct and robust governance principles in place, which don't just mitigate downside risk, but actually create competitive advantage. So as a mining company, if you do this really well, does that actually open up, new opportunities for you? Does it give you, because of your strong governance, do you become a preferred miner in a particular region, as an example? Or are you able to really leverage that in your relationship with that local government or that regional government or that national government, as an example? And these governance principles, you touched on transparency, but it is anything like, what are your policies around, child labor, as an example? What are your policies around, human rights, as an example, or your policies when it comes to things like, anti-corruption and all the rest? And do you have the systems in place which actually allow you to track that from soup to nuts? And so if you are sourcing a particular input into your supply chain, and that is a local supplier, can you give that end investor the reassurance that the systems are in place so that you know how that input was actually produced, right? And so that's really what we mean about strong governance. And in the trend, we talk about different aspects of government. We talk about what we believe are some of the key policies that mining companies, should be putting in place, and how do they turn that into a form of competitive advantage going forward.
Right. And it's something that we've been trying to shed light on in terms of the suppliers to, if they're not thinking about right now, to be prepared to demonstrate this clarity, and I'll call it transparency again, that they're adhering to these policies as well.
Correct.
And contributing. So, and I think, Trend 6 now kind of dovetails very nicely. This obviously speaks very clearly to the supply chain, the agile supply chain. And what I took from it was really tied to preventing these global supply shocks with last year certainly kind of shedded a real clear light on this aspect. And I'll just let you kind of explain a little more.
So, COVID was an interesting crisis, and I mean, we're obviously all still in the midst of it, right? But one of the things in the early stages of the crisis that it revealed was that a lot of mining companies were not aware of their suppliers 2, 3, 4, 5 layers down, right? And so as you think about your immediate inputs to your supply chain, there are suppliers feeding those suppliers and suppliers feeding those suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. And so when it came to looking particularly at areas like critical spares or sort of key things which are really required to keep these operations running. I don't think a lot of mining companies truly appreciated some of the risk that was sitting inside of their supply chains. Right? So, we worked with one global mining company where we analyzed their supply chain 8 layers down, right? And suddenly when you began to look at that, you say, oh, all right, well, for this one critical piece of equipment, one of the suppliers to that supplier is sitting in a particular region of the world, which is, looking very vulnerable from a COVID perspective. And so are you likely to get some supply chain disruption as this crisis unfolds? And now, given how fluid the whole situation is, that could be an issue today, but another supplier could be an issue tomorrow or the week after, et cetera. And so, how do you construct the right sort of balanced supply base, which allows you to both create or get the advantage of scale, but also balances out with that the risk associated with some of those suppliers, right? And while some organizations have moved to what I'd say call more localization to it, localization isn't always the answer, right? And so there's no right or wrong answer here, but I think it's an issue where COVID has revealed that there is risk in the supply chain. And so how mining companies deal with this in a dynamic way is key. And I think for your suppliers, being able to create that transparency of where some of the inputs into their particular, supply base is actually sort of coming from will be central to having that dialogue with miners themselves. And so if it's not COVID this year, it's going to be some other crisis the year after or whatever it is. It could be a major earthquake that happens somewhere around the world. I mean, remember 10 years ago when, big volcano in Europe sort of, erupted, and that disrupted, travel for sort of several weeks. And so I think that a lot of mining companies historically have just looked at the supply chain through the lens of cost, which is, we spend a lot of money on these input costs, cut. There's another element to that is, well, maybe some of those particular inputs to your commodities you may be paying higher prices for, but it actually mitigates a bunch of risk for you in some sort of key areas. And so taking a more balanced view of the supply chain, not only through a cost lens, but also through a risk lens, we think is going to be a critical element going forward.
Right. That makes complete sense. The trend there, integrated operations, trend number 7. This is tied to, I think they're all very interrelated, right? So this is about an organization trying to be able to pivot quickly in terms of their operations and reactions to events. What else can you add to that?
Yeah, so that's absolutely one component to it. In terms of integrated operations, it's a concept which has been around for a while, but I'd say it is a trend which we see accelerating over time, and it's one of those trends which I think has come particularly to the forefront with digitization really taking hold within the mining industry, right? And so what digitization has enabled is data and transparency around that data and be able to make decisions against that data. So at its heart, integrated operations is a couple of key things. One is it's about taking a systems view of the mine or the mining complex. 2, it's about making trade-offs across that system. And 3, it's about empowering people with the right data, the right dashboards, the right information in order to make those trade-offs and make those particular decisions. And so, as you well know, a lot of the aspects of mining is very siloed, right? You will have the milling and beneficiation circuit guys may not be talking to the mining guys. Why? Because there's a big healthy stockpile in between which provides a buffer. And different aspects of mines tend to be very, very siloed. So the move towards integrated operations is really one where mining companies are beginning to look beyond just the immediate value chain to say, let's really look at this broader asset. Let's maybe look at broader, optimization from a broader organizational perspective. And in some cases, not all cases, in some cases, some companies have gone all the way to actually go and creating an integrated operations center, an IROC, okay? But we shouldn't be fooled into thinking that technology is going to be the silver bullet that's going to save everything. And so what we talk about in the trend is that there is this move towards integrated operations. Technology is one component of it, but there are also a lot of other components to it. Thinking about your processes, thinking about your people, thinking about your culture, right? And so there are those kinds of things which you have to tackle if you really want to get the benefit of driving towards integrated operations. But that doesn't necessarily mean go and put an IROC in.
Right. And that's and in terms of the automation aspect too, it seems that there's been a bit of a mixed results out there in the industry right now. So it's there's more to it than
agreed. And I think it's mixed results because a lot of people have chased technology for the sake of technology.
Right.
And at the end of the day, people need to use the technology, and the technology needs to be, part of a broader, a broader strategy on how these companies are going to drive that level of efficiency.
And I think that's a great segue to trend number 8, which is the future of work, which is what does that future workforce look like? And are they, is the culture ready to embrace and utilize and maximize the adoption of these technologies?
Yeah, we've spoken about future of work for, a number of years. And then lo and behold, in March last year, you and I went from enjoying a drink at our PDAC party to a life of Zoom calls for the year thereafter. And so suddenly future of work became, the thing we weren't just talking about, but it became our daily reality, right? And so that has manifested or translated itself into mining operations in many different ways. Obviously, for people in the headquarters, it has meant, working from home and remote work. For people within the operations, themselves, for some functions, it's meant those people can also work from home. But for others, it's also meant relooking at things like automation and digitization, and how do we leverage some of those sort of technologies going forward. So there's a whole myriad of implications. And what we haven't tried to do in this trend is get into the technology side of this, where we've said, hey, you could automate all of these tasks, or you could, digitize X, Y, and Z, etc. What we've really focused in on this trend is 2 aspects: leadership and culture. And why do we believe that those are important here? Well, first of all, on the culture side, if you, as we come out of this crisis, there are going to be lasting impacts on corporate head offices, right? I speak to CEOs and board chairs, all the time, and pretty much all of them, come back to me and say to me, hey, we're going to rethink our corporate head office structures, right? And it's not necessarily going to translate to letting people go, but it's going to be hey, we don't need the 5 floors of real estate that we had before in downtown Toronto. We need 1 floor, and we're going to give people a bunch of flexibility. And they'll come in and come, out of the office in some sort of a hot desking type system. And so that's going to be a sort of a reality. And so you get into things well, how do you create a corporate-wide culture in an organization which is, increasingly maybe more decentralized, has got flatter structures, not a lot of in-person connectivity between people, right? So how do you create that corporate culture going forward? So I think that's going to be an important aspect. And then the other side of that is one around leadership, which is we actually believe that mining companies are going to need different kinds of leaders going forward, or you're going to need new leadership skills that are going to come forward. And they relate to a lot of the elements of the trends that we've covered. So we believe resiliency will be an important, quality, the ability to be able to, execute strategy in a very dynamic way. Leaders for whom ESG is absolutely top of mind. Leaders who will probably embrace risk in new and interesting ways, and so I think there are a whole bunch of those sort of leadership traits which will become more and more important as we think about the future of work. So how do you drive a new and create culture in this new future of work environment, and then what are the kind of leaders that you need to be able to drive all of that?
Right, that makes complete sense. And the last trend we have here, which again, all these, dovetail into each other very nicely. And this has been trend always, safety approach, targeting zero harm. And it's always been on the tracking the trends, and rightly so. And I find, technology as a key opportunity for us to be able to potentially remove the person from the line of sight or harm's way, if you will. But there's also a whole series of technologies, such as I believe you mentioned wearables. There's a lot in here that I think the supplier space can really help out.
Agreed. Again, safety, not a new topic to the industry, right? I mean, it is so embedded within the culture of the industry. But the question, and I think what prompted for us the dialogue around this particular trend, is that we see there are so many opportunities out there to really make this goal of zero harm, a reality, right? Technology is at a point where, from an analytics and a data perspective, it's never been at the state that it is kind of today. You've got a myriad of wearable technologies that are out there which give the ability to be able to monitor body functions all the way to environmental conditions and things like that, and hence be able to give you a lot of those early warning signs. But at the same token, COVID has done some interesting things for us. One of the interesting things, and depending on your political views, might have different kind of views on this, but I think it has probably it has probably challenged us as individuals in some interesting ways around our levels of privacy. And so, as we go into this sort of next phase of COVID and we get vaccinated, you are going to be, declaring whether or not you've had the vaccine or not, right? You've already got track and trace type systems that are now pretty commonplace in all kind of parts of the world. And so that boundary on privacy has moved. So we put all of that together and we say, gee, we've got these big analytic solutions. We've got a lot of these kind of wearables, and we've got this new dynamic kind of around privacy. Why is it that we're not able to really attain this aspect of kind of zero harm? And so what we deal with the trend is to say, gee, maybe now is the time to rethink a lot of this stuff, right? One of the things that's held back wearables is interoperability issues, right? You get lots of different technology systems which don't necessarily talk to each other, right? That's a real inhibitor. Yeah, you've got this big data, but big data could be so much more if the industry actually collaborated, if the industry pooled safety data together and actually drove real big data analytics, across that. And maybe now is the time to drive the dialogue around, deeper penetration of wearables, given that people's level of comfort with technology and maybe with privacy has changed somewhat. So just as we look out over the next couple of years, we think there's an interesting time that we're in right now to be able to really try and attain this goal of zero harm by relooking the use of technology and how the industry can collaborate to make that a reality.
Yeah, and it really speaks to me in terms of trust, right? It's the trust piece really allows us to move forward, but not in a naive manner, understanding that information can still be used and technology can be used, as we've seen, in ill-intentioned ways, I'll say. So, but it's a fascinating discussion. And Andrew, I want to thank you for coming on the DAC here and talking about tracking the trends. I'm always look forward to listening and reading about it. I think your Deloitte's done a great job, putting it out there in terms of breaking down the information. There's a lot to digest, but it's very, very good quality data and information. I think I encourage everyone that's viewing this to take a chance and take the time to go through. There's lots to read there and determine where they fit in terms of the solutions to these trends. So once again, thank you very much, Andrew, for being on the DAC.
No problem. Very, very happy that I could be part of this.
Let's take a look at the biggest stories affecting the mining industry today. We call it 6 and 60. President and CEO of Barrick Gold, Mark Bristow, said the company is well positioned for industry consolidation efforts with zero debt and record cash flow in 2020. The U.S. administration plans to review key supply chains, including rare earth metals. It is speculated the review is due to the reliance on Chinese exports. BlackRock unveiled a plan for a net zero emissions future. That is on the heels of CEO Larry Fink's annual letter urging companies to do the same. Residents of Cuenca, Ecuador, home to over 500,000 people, voted 80% in favor of banning future large-scale mining activities. An Ontario government task force recommended changes to make capital raising in public markets easier. Experts say this could benefit Canada's junior miners. And finally, good news for Cameco as the Supreme Court dismissed Canada Revenue Agency's appeal related to a 13-year-old dispute on tax reassessment in the amount of $785 million. That is your 6 and 60. That's it for this week's show. I'd like to thank Andrew Swart from Deloitte and Stephanie Alvarez. Next week, I'll be speaking with John Mason from the City of Thunder Bay about growth opportunities in mining in Northwestern Ontario. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter at Mining Suppliers. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel to get instant access to the latest episode and past episodes of The Dig. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, I'm Ryan McEachern. Take care and stay safe.